let's start by doing introductions, who you are, what you've written, what you're knitting, and we'll start with Jessica down there and work our way up.
So my name is Jessica K. George. I'm a best-selling author of 15 books. A little over half of them are middle grade, and the rest are young adults. All of them are fantasy books. And I am knitting a sweater for myself from a yarn that I found, which is called Old Library Books. This color scheme.
Ooh, nice.
Does this not look like those undust jacketed old books with like the yellowy pages? Like, I'm so delighted. Anyway, thank you for asking about my knitting. No one ever does.
I'm Allison Hymas, and I am between knitting projects. It happens. I'm a middle grade author. I've got 2 books out, Under Locker and Key, and the second one is called Arts and Thefts, and they're about a 12-year-old middle school thief for hire who gets into trouble and has to team up with his nemesis, a 12-year-old girl detective who hates his guts in order to save the school. So that's what I do.
You have to turn them on because they...
Of course.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm Gama Martinez. I write a couple of middle grade series. My big one is called Fairmore, which is a 7-book series, and I'm working on another one called Goblin Star, which is sci-fi fantasy mixed. I am not knitting anything, so...
Nobody's perfect.
I'm Janci Patterson. Most of my published books are young adult. I have a middle grade superhero book out that you can find on my website. And I'm also finishing the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarian series with Brandon Sanderson. I'm co-writing the final book.
Nice. And I am Scott Savage. I started writing adult books and thrillers and then switched over to middle grade, and that's what I do now. I wrote the Far World series, the Case File 13 series, the Mysteries of Cove series, and if you're in my classes, I'll be reading this a lot. This announcement just came out in Publishers Weekly about 20 minutes ago. And I've been waiting for months to be able to tell people about this. So Chris Schobinger at Shadow Mountain has bought in an exclusive submission the first 2 books in J. Scott Savage's middle grade series, The Wonderland Diaries, in which 13-year-old Celia Littleton, a descendant of Alice in Wonderland author Lewis Carroll, finds his missing diaries and discovers that his tales weren't fiction at all, but observations of a real place filled with dangerous creatures that, if allowed into our world, could destroy everything. Volume 1 is set for spring of 2020. So, yay! Yeah, so I'm excited about that. So let's start out. We're talking about middle grade. Let's start out first of all by not like Webster's dictionary defines, but what does strong middle grade mean to you as authors when you're either writing something or especially when you're reading something? What just clicks for you and you go, wow, that was a really strong. I mean, is it stories that mostly kids are going to love? Is it the more literary stuff? Is it the award-winning stuff? What is it that makes you go, that was a really powerful middle grade series?
I will go. We're all going to look awkward.
And Lisa Mangum, who I believe is also here, and if you have not heard Lisa talk, hear Lisa talk. She's fabulous. She's an editor and author, and she can just nail it. And last year, she was saying the difference between middle grade and young adults is that middle graders, like that age group, the tweens, are finding their place in their world. And the young adult books are more finding out who you are. So the middle graders are like, where do I fit into my family with a new family dynamic, or step siblings, or my stepmother's an alien, whatever, things like that. They're finding their, and so a recent one, which I was just waxing rhapsodic about in the previous panel on award winners, this year they just 2 weeks ago announced this year's Newbery and Prince award-winning books. And one of the Newbery honor books from this year, which I think should have won, but that's just me, anyway, is called Boy. Just Boy, and the author is a woman and she has 3 names and I can't remember what it is, but Boy is set during the 1350, which is called the Holy Year. It was the year after the first wash of the Black Plague, basically, and people who did not die of the plague went on a lot of pilgrimages to thank God and the Pope for them not dying. And so there was a huge market in religious artifacts, like this is the finger bone of St. Peter and will protect you from further plague and things like that, which, were just like actual bones they stole from graves. But Boy is this boy. He is a hunchback. He has always been despised. He sleeps with the goats. And this pilgrim comes to their farm and says, I need to take this kid with me. And basically, Boy is sold to this man who says he's going on pilgrimage to Rome. And Boy is not supposed to ever take his hood off and show people his hair. He is not supposed to ever bathe. These are very strict rules that have been placed on him for reasons I will not tell you because it's a huge spoiler. It's the most amazing thing in the entire world. But Boy doesn't know who he is. Is he one of the goats? He doesn't have a family. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't like to eat. He doesn't like to talk to people. He doesn't want anyone to look at him. And this pilgrim comes to him and is like, come with me. He immediately looks at this kid rolling in filth and goes, you, right now, you have to come with me. And they are going around to all the holy sites associated with St. Peter. And this pilgrim is stealing the artifacts. St. Peter's rib, his toe bone. And Boy realizes that these are real. They really are the parts of St. Peter. And the guy he is with cannot touch them because they burn him. And so Boy has to decide, does he tell someone? Who does he tell? Like, that story is so powerful on so many levels. He does not have a family. He doesn't have anything. He doesn't like himself. And then this person he's with is this person, a good person, an evil person, like, and what should Boy do about it? It's so good. I cannot stress this enough. You must read this book. But that's the kind of thing that speaks to me, where you've got a kid who's got so much going on and wants so hard to do right, to be a good person, but how? How does he do it? And it's up to him. A little kid, basically. What should he do?
What's the name of that book again?
Boy.
So what was the question again?
What is powerful middle grade to you? What do you take away and you go, wow, that was a really great? Is it funny, more silly? Is it literature? Is it award winning? What is a strong middle grade story to you?
Well, personally, my thing is I like books that are innocent enough to be marketed toward middle grade kids, but dark enough to raise eyebrows over the fact that they're marketed toward middle grade kids. That is my favorite genre of all time, and I'll read anything that's in that. But I would, kind of going off what Jessica said, I like middle grade that where the main character has to deal with a question that is hard, something that maybe they haven't been able to encounter before. What is the right thing to do this time? How do they do the right thing? It's in my mind, I feel like it's the thing that separates it from the tween from the kid who can rely on a parent or an adult to tell them what to do, and the teen who is questioning who would potentially question
the teen's seen this before, and now they're just questioning the way they answered it before.
Right, whereas this is the first time this kid
has not seen it before.
Like, one of the fun things I get to do in my book is I've got this kid who's a thief, and so he's constantly encountering the question of, is he doing the right thing? He's using his skills for good, or he's trying to, but he's still robbing people, and and he keeps coming up with this question, is he doing the right thing? Is he the good guy? And it's kind of a fun, tricky question because it's something that he's never had to encounter before. And so I like that, and I like dark middle grade. I like your books, the Peter
Thank you. In an earlier panel, she used you as her example.
Oh, you're my hero. Thank you.
I like reading books about the people I wanted to be when I grow up. You hear about the kid who, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a dinosaur. I want to read the story about the dinosaur. That's the powerful, because that's what I wanted to be when I was a kid. So that's what's powerful for me, is what I wanted to be.
And you kind of still want to be a dinosaur.
Well, yeah.
Right?
If you can be a dinosaur, always be a dinosaur. I really love character stories across genres, and I think it's wonderful in middle grade. Being a kid is kind of like living in a totalitarian regime, right? You don't have any freedom, you don't have any power, and so
not a democracy.
you don't even have to set it in a dystopian world for it to be this kind of terrifying place where your character is needing to reach deep within themselves and figure out who they are and how they can affect the world. It's just sort of there, and so I love the stories stories that dig into that sort of a thing, and the kids are learning to grapple with these hard emotions that, like, because kids feel the same emotions adults do, they're just less good at expressing them sometimes. Sometimes we're really bad as adults too. And so the books that really get at that are my favorites.
Nice. So, in the last panel that I was on, one of the things that we talked about is kind of who your target audience is, and not just a fifth grader, but it's like, okay, it is this girl who is this age that does this, or it is this person who likes this, and things like that. And it's interesting because middle grade has a really wide range. Are you writing what a lot of kids will call chapter books or entry-level reading, or are you writing more what I call like the Percy Jackson, where it's like the really that fine line between the two? I had an experience on my side, and then I want to open up to your thoughts on this, where when I wrote the Case File 13 book, Harper sent me a box of books to read, of what they had, and I read them, and they all had tons of potty humor, and I was like, crap, I don't have any potty humor in Zombie Kid. So I totally added all these potty humor jokes, and then I gave them to my editor, and he took them all out. And I was like, oh, clearly I'm not good at potty humor jokes, I'll do better. So I tried again, and I put different ones in, and he took them out, and I'm like, okay, I'm confused here. Am I not doing potty humor well? Or, and he said, no, but he said, I think that Zombie Kid is a smart book. And he said, what I mean by that is I think that not only kids are going to enjoy it, but I think that the gatekeepers, the adults, librarians and stuff who read it are going to like it as well, a lot. And so I don't want to take a chance on offending them by putting that in there. So in this book, I think you shouldn't do that. And I took his advice, and that ended up being by far my most awarded book so far. So when you view a target audience, and again, you'd obviously like to write for everyone, but who do you write for? Who is that person that you write your stories for?
We want to ripple down from it.
Yeah, whatever order you want. Jump in. It doesn't have to be like A, B, C, D.
I'm really fortunate in the middle grade that I'm writing now that my audience is fans of the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarian series, because no one else is going to read book 6. But what's been really fun about that was getting to read the series again and make a list of all the things that, as a fan, I wish we could see, or promises that I think were made way back in the beginning, and making this list and comparing it with Brandon's list, and then with his continuity editor, Karen, also gave me a whole list of stuff that she wanted to see, and getting to sit there and as a fan of the series say, I am the reader, what do I want this to be, and what do the fans want this to be, and what are all the characteristics that make these books what the fans love. And I wonder, I have never done this, but I wonder if that would be kind of an interesting thing to do starting a new series, is pick a series that is sort of has the same audience that you want to shoot for, and do sort of a similar thing of people who read this, what do they want to see in a book? And obviously you're not stealing things from that book, but what else could you do that would appeal to that audience? I have never done that, but just listening to that made me think that would be a really cool way to write a series.
I did it.
Did you? Talk about it. I want to hear about it.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the times, I tell kids at schools, I grew up in the dark time known as BHP, before Harry Potter. When all the books were either about babysitting or animals dying. And I love horses, and I wanted a horse so bad. And every horse book I picked up was either about babysitting, where the main girl saved up all her babysitting money to buy a horse in the last chapter, or the horse died to teach her to be more responsible with her pets. So I literally am now about, I've had my book that came out last year is called The Rose Legacy. It's the first book in a trilogy that I have been working on since I was a wee child. Actually, in a Cabbage Patch Kid's diary are the first 3 chapters of this series. Based on girls who love horses, tween girls who love horses, and want to read about riding a horse, and the horse doesn't die. No, my solemn promise to all my readers is that no horses will die during the course of this series. And I don't care if that robs it of some peril. I'm I will kill children. But I will not kill a horse. Because that but I feel like I'm writing to that. I'm writing to that, to the girls that love to read about horses but don't want to read about things like, well, he has colic, we're going to have to shoot him. Like, does anyone else remember the totally horrifying episode of The Black Stallion where they were on a plane and he got colic, the black did, and crashed the plane, and you thought Alec and the black were dead? What is wrong with Walter Farley? Absolutely, just like, I remember just sitting there crying and making my sister finish the book and tell me if it was going to be okay, because what the frack, Walter Farley. Anyway, so I feel like a lot of my books are written like towards an audience in that this would have been me a few years ago, but it's now like, you know, people who love to read about horses or kids that love to read about dragons. My first trilogy was Dragon Slippers, and I always wanted the kids in the dragon books, you know, I didn't want any dragons to be slain. Like, I wanted to make friends with the dragons. I wanted to have tea with the black dragon and not have him turn into a sexy man, which was nice as I got older. But like, Tea with the Black Dragon is a great book, but I read that way too young and was very not expecting that. So like, I want to write towards, and I heard it called, in fact last year, Susan Chang, who's an editor at Tor, was talking about that they call it sort of like the forgotten generation, but also there is a real gap between the first chapter book kids and the high school kids. Basically the junior high kids, the books aimed at them, the Percy Jackson age.
Right. Yeah.
There's Percy Jackson, and now he's doing kind of his own imprints of wonderful stuff, but that's like the only things out there. You make a huge jump from, I discovered a magic gnome in my garden in 6 chapters or less, to like, and now we're all gonna die on a spaceship in a teen book. There's not a lot in between, and I'm kind of writing towards that because I made that jump too. I read the Pony Pals, you know, type of thing, and all the ponies died, and the next thing I know I was being handed like Crime and Punishment because, well, you're almost a teenager, time for adult life, you know? So there's like that gap there, and that's what I feel like a good middle grade book should be accessible and not make those kids feel dumb if they're not emotionally ready for something like, I don't know, throw something out there, whatever. I always say Twilight just because everyone knows what it is, but you know, like if you're not emotionally ready for those teen books, but you've gone well beyond it's 100 pages and we solved the leprechaun mystery, like there's got to be something in between.
Is it bad to say that the first audience I write for is myself?
No.
I think as long as the first. I think that's almost always the first. Yeah.
No, what the only bad answer is I'm writing for my bank account because I think that's what makes me rich.
I'm going off yours again. I keep going off your comments, but it makes me feel good. Good. There was, when I was growing up, Mom and Dad taught me to read pretty young, so by the time I got to elementary school, I was bored to tears of the books they were giving me. Not because of reading level or anything like that, I got so sick of you found a gnome in your garden in 6 chapters or less, and I wanted really cool books. I wanted books with adventure and excitement. I wanted books where the characters would get into these shenanigans that I would never get into because I was a good kid and I did not do anything that would make my mom upset because she would be disappointed and I would be sad because she was disappointed in me. And but I had this, I just loved these stories where these kids would go to haunted houses and stay the night and encounter ghosts and would make homemade grappling hooks because why not, and use them because that sounded like a good idea at the time. And I was the kid who was out in the backyard encouraging my siblings to make homemade grappling hooks, but I couldn't do that because I was the good kid.
You're the instigator.
I got so good at instigating. And I think that's who I ended up writing these books for, these kids who, well, I used to be a substitute teacher when I was actually writing the Jeremy Wilderson books, and there was this kid who would, he brought me over to his computer and he showed me how he managed to clone the teacher's computer on his own. And I was like, don't ever do that again. Writing down the notes. How did you do that? But I think that's who I ended up writing with. My second audience is this group of kids who want to have these adventures and want to do these things that are bold and daring, but maybe feel like they can't because they have to be good or they're just a little scared to. In the end, these are I think that's the audience that I'm writing to. These kids who dream big.
I actually found out I write middle grade entirely by accident. I submitted a book to Pyre, and I got my very first personal rejection. I submitted it as YA, and then Lou Anders, the editor at the time, came back to, this is fantastic. This isn't YA, it's middle grade. And it suddenly just opened my eyes. I was like, oh, that's who I'm writing to. But yeah, it's the same sort of thing. It's that gap that there wasn't anything, and I was trying to fill it. So yeah, it's the same sort of thing.
Awesome. Oh. So, did you? No. Okay. So, based on, again, talking about what these kids want to do, I did a middle grade panel with Jessica, and I think it was Brandon, that we did last year. And one of the things that someone was brought up was that protagonists, especially in middle grade books, do things that kids that age wouldn't really do. And the kind of consensus that we came back to was that, at least the middle grade books that we like, are things where the protagonists do what kids imagine they would do or wish they would do. So when you're deciding what a middle grade protagonist might be capable of, is there any point where you go, okay, this is too much? How much involvement do you need to have with the parents? I mean, how do you maintain that belief that a kid that age could really accomplish that while still getting exciting stories?
My first middle grade novel is called Searching for Super, and it's about a little boy who wants more. He lives in a world where there are superheroes, and his dad's a superhero, and he wants more than anything to be a superhero. And so he decides that the way that you do this is you go to the insect zoo and you get bitten by the radioactive spider. And you go and you expose yourself to nuclear waste and things. And so he goes through this book trying to do all of these things, and his best friend is trying to stop him. And I think that in a fantasy world like that, you can get away with some hand-wavium of like, yeah, okay, so the nuclear reactor is going to be better blocked than this, right? And kind of at the end, he realizes he couldn't have done that at all to begin with because they have security. But in a fantasy world, if it's not set in our world and it's not super realistic, hyper-realistic fiction, it's okay if they're able to get through more than they really would because we want them to get into danger. And if the reader wants something to happen, they will forgive you if it's not 100% realistic.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I remember one of the hardest things I had to cut. I have a book where it's basically they're space elves, and this one kid is in a starfighter built by a dragon, and he's come upon this goblin in his own spaceship, and he had this big moral dilemma. About whether or not he should fire because that would kill the goblin. And I was like, you know what? I'm having this big internal debate about whether or not he should kill. That's not a middle grade decision.
No.
And so, I mean, I loved it, but I ended up taking it out because, that's not something I imagined when I was a kid. I never imagined having that sort of decision. Flying around in a dragon-built starfighter, great. But, that other stuff is, you just going to where... Sorry, keep in mind, we're writing towards middle grade where they will accept kind of what Jensen said. They will accept what they wanted to happen. They will accept what they were imagining. But, you have to be careful not to go beyond that because there are things that they're not thinking about.
Yeah. I like what you said about about how kids will just accept what they can imagine. I do write realistic middle grade, and so my main character, he has made his own homemade grappling hook, and he does use it due to something that I like to call the it seemed like a good idea at the time lobe of the brain. And looking back, I grew up a fairly free-range child. My mom let us run around the neighborhood all the time, and we got into so much trouble. So that's something that I bring into my books is just, I think it's believable, at least given my background, that kids can get into some really crazy trouble all by themselves by trying to make homemade grappling hooks and then using them to swing out of a trey, or trying to hold onto the back of a car while riding a skateboard. And
Marty McFly does it.
Marty McFly does it. I have a friend who actually did jump off the roof of his house onto the trampoline to see if he could do it when he was about that age. And so, on that aspect, I kind of enjoy writing middle grade because I can see those things happening. And along with that, try and make it realistic to kids. My main character, when he's doing his little heists, he has items that kids might have. He's got this homemade grappling hook, but that's kind of the most extensive thing he has. But he'll use chewing gum and string. He'll
like MacGyver.
He got MacGyver his way through. He'll use homemade grappling hook, or not. I'm really stuck on that grappling hook. Homemade lock picks, and I try to give him tools that a sixth grader would in fact have, and then give him the will to do what seems like a good idea at the time. And that's how I try to do this.
Yeah, well, what we were saying too on that panel is you want to look up to your hero. So reader wants to look up to their hero. And so they always say too, like age-wise, the reader is going to read up. So if you honestly say your main character is 11 years old, your target audience is actually going to be assumed to be 9. Because 9-year-olds don't want to read about other 9-year-olds because they know a lot of other 9-year-olds, they're not that great. But 11-year-olds are in 5th grade, and sometimes they have lockers, so they want to read up. But also, so you want the main character, you want them to be a little bit cooler than you, able to do stuff like you might want to build a grappling hook, but you never have actually figured out how to do it, but this kid has, so that's like, but you don't want him to be Superman, I don't think. I've always had a hard time with Superman because, as Seinfeld once said, why do they need the other superheroes? They have the Superman. Right. Yep. He's better, stronger, faster, has like 19 powers, he's like Jack, like 17 powers and a super suit that's red and stuff like that. And what else is needed? Nothing. He's got it all. So if you've got a character that you set up as like, this kid is only 12 years old, yet he's a super genius, he's a this, he's a that, he's an expert in martial arts, and blah, blah, blah. I don't care, because he's boring, because we know he will win, because he's just that cool. You can't look up to him because he makes you uncomfortable and feel bad because he's so much cooler than you. So you want to take it down like a notch from being like the ultimate superhero. If you've got like a kid with a superpower, there's got to be a flaw to it. So it's like, oh my gosh, he can fly. I love it. I would love to be able to fly. Oh, I'm so jealous. Ooh, he throws up every time he flies because he's afraid of heights. Like, just bring it down just a notch. And like you were saying about like, what if he killed someone? Like, kids, the worst thing they can think of, and they might say like, oh no, she's gonna kill me. They don't mean it, because they can't fathom changes that permanent. They're still learning to deal with death. So killing is so far off their radar, but they can imagine other things that might happen that would be as bad. To them, like tattling and getting grounded might be the worst thing. So you need to like recognize that, like what are kind of their limitations, because what they're imagining is super dangerous and perilous is probably not decapitation, but like breaking their leg because they broke their leg last summer and they couldn't swim at all last summer. So they're looking at jumping off the roof as, can I still do it without breaking my leg again? Because that's something they know and can pull back from. You need to like just always be aware that these pull back from this, because I get this a lot from my editor, like, do all the parents have to be dead? Like, if the parents have to be dead, do you have to describe the deaths? Maybe we should step back from that just a little bit. I'm like, all right, fine. But
I think there's a difference too between if you're writing a protagonist who is really exceptional or a protagonist who their defining characteristic is that they are ordinary, right? There's whole genres of books in both of these camps, right? You have your Harry Potters, and then I'm thinking of some of the more literary contemporary middle grade, like James Howey's Misfits, where the feature of these kids is that they are normal kids who are going to triumph anyway, but the feature of them is that they are normal, they are not exceptional. And I think that you have to handle barriers to their success differently. Like exceptional people, Harry Potter gets to do all the things because he's Harry Potter, right? Whereas the normal kids, if they start bypassing some of these normal barriers to middle grade kids being heroes, then it stretches believability in a way it doesn't with your exceptional protagonists.
So let's do one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience. When you were talking about that I forget how you described it, but it was like, I want these characters who then do things, I have my characters do things that they really shouldn't or something like that, you know, kind of that crossing the line. How edgy do you get with middle grade? And I had a librarian, this was in South Georgia, and she said, no, in your case file books, we have those in our library, and our kids really like them. I'm like, yay. And she goes, but in Zombie Kid, you have real voodoo in those books. And I said, yes. And then I realized, like, she was like, that's not a good thing. Oh, well, I mean, it's not
You're at the
that
school that banned Harry Potter for witchcraft.
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah. So in middle grade, one of our big places to be is libraries, is schools, is with librarians, with gatekeepers, that sort of thing. So how do you create challenging and cool and edgy stuff that kids are going to like without crossing the line of having people say these stories aren't appropriate for our kids to be reading in our school or library or whatever?
You can't hit every library because there are people banning Harry Potter for teaching children witchcraft. And I'm like, all he does is use Expelliarmus over and over again. It actually works. So no, but there are rough guidelines, and they can be very specific to your publisher. So like that's one thing. Working with Bloomsbury's done all of my books thus far, but I actually have a contract with Random House, and it's been very interesting because the editor at Random House actually worked with me at Bloomsbury, and when I started this book with her, she actually goes, by the way, you can do this, this, and this for her, you know, because Random House has an edgier reputation and is going to be a young adult book series. So Bloomsbury has their own tastes, and generally for their middle grade, fantasy tends to be very sweet, and there shall not be swears and things like that, and that is Bloomsbury. And so that says to librarians and teachers, but this is a Bloomsbury. It's like Shannon Hale's Goose Girl and Princess Academy, Dragon with the Chocolate Heart, The Frog Princess by E.D. Baker. They know. So they know if there's been problems with those books, then they're not going to order them. And so they have kind of guidelines for the publisher that I sort of work within. And if I feel that a story is not going to work, like, oh, I really want to do this, you know, and they're not going to like it, then I'm not going to publish it with them. I'll take it elsewhere. There is also a consideration, though, that I have never run into, so I'm very curious, that I was told by my editor to kind of pander to the Scholastic book orders because they have very rigorous standards of what they will carry. And I was asked by an editor who fortunately is no longer my editor because I feel like it kind of pulled some of the teeth on one of my books, and then they still didn't pick it up, those Scholastic book orders. But Scholastic book orders will not carry a book in which suicide is mentioned unless it is a book specifically about dealing with suicide, for one thing. So I had one of my parent deaths was that a dad had gotten into gambling debt, and it was implied that he had killed himself because of gambling debt, which is very common in the Regency period in which the book was set. So, and that's no bueno for like the Scholastic book orders. They have sort of a set of their own guidelines where the books have to be definitely PG-13, and they're even if it's a toast and it's yet back in medieval times, you can't say that the kids have wine, even though totally they would have because the water was all full of bugs. You know, you can't say. You can just say they had a toast, but not what they were drinking. They have very strict rules about alcohol, different things like that, and the level of violence you can have in these books and stuff like that when they're considering a book. And so I was asked by an editor to pander to the Scholastic book order, and it didn't work, but I did. But so, like, and I've never, every other author I've ever spoken about that to is like, Scholastic book order has guidelines. I don't know, they're getting, you know, so I don't know. But I was asked to look into it. But I just feel like publishers have brands, and that's what the librarians are looking for, because you cannot please like every librarian up in Idaho. Like you just cannot. I can say that for
My editor made me count how many times my character said crap because of the Scholastic book orders.
Yes, I'm not crazy.
So that's a real thing. I am the person who said that I like dark middle grade. Like, I like it dark. I like it dark enough to make people a little bit concerned this is marketing for kids. Any Gravity Falls fans out there in the audience? There we go. That's my genre. That's my favorite genre. And I feel like I haven't had too much pushback because my books are fairly silly, so I haven't had too many people tell me what I can and can't do yet, because I haven't tested that limit. But I know that I and some of the other people, some of the kids that I've seen are just too.
You were just getting too dark.
I was getting too dark.
I can't
Too dark. But I kind of the books that I really enjoy, the middle grade books that are dark, maybe they don't get into dark, like really graphic violence. They don't have swears or adult material necessarily, but they push the characters to their limits. They push the kids to the places where they just are unhappy. They're losing the things they value the most. They're dealing with problems that they just don't know how to handle, and then the kids succeed. I think that a book can get in my mind, my taste, I think a book can get as dark as can get pretty dark as long as it comes out happy at the end. As long as the kids see that there is some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, that they succeed, that they beat the monster, they win the day, even if it's hard along the way. And then there's the publisher guidelines of swears and how many times you say the word crap.
So you're primarily writing to your own guideline, and then
I write to my own guideline. Again, I haven't had a pushback yet, so I haven't been.
So you're not taking it far enough.
I'm not taking it far enough. All right.
Hey Jeff, I have a question.
Sure.
So does that mean you can never kill a monster in a book in its middle grade?
No, in fact, I'll tell you an interesting thing is, so I talked to a mom one time who, she took her kid, he wanted to go see Lord of the Rings, and he saw Lord of the Rings and loved it, and he was very young, didn't bother him at all. Then he went and saw a far less violent movie, but with real people, and it totally freaked him out. And in general, what I tend to see in middle grade, and you guys can respond, but like person on goblin violence, or goblin on goblin violence, or dragon or whatever, that's totally okay. Person on person, like Harper told me, I mean, I had a series where a mad scientist is stealing body parts from graves and building football players. Okay, that was what and this was young middle grade. But when I had him cloning brains from previous serial killers, he's like, no. That was like an immediate, you cannot do that. So I think that fantasy violence is much easier to get away with in middle grade than real violence. Would you guys agree?
Yes.
Okay.
And even science fiction tends to skew older. You'll see a lot more science fiction in like the YA and stuff like that, because it tends to be real people making these decisions. Even if there's aliens, most of the main characters are going to be real people, so it's going to be a little bit more shocking when there are these types of deaths and things like that. But and you definitely, if your monster is sympathetic and your main character is also supposed to be sympathetic and they're killing the monster, it's sort of like a why Tommy, but I think fantasy violence, you'll see a lot of. If you tell people the plot of many children's fantasy books, except you leave out the fact that was a dragon or something like that, people would be horrified.
Exactly.
People would be just like, they sold their daughter to someone who was going to eat her, and then the person was too old to eat her. Right. So she killed the person and left, and that's the plot of my first book, which is a middle grade. But it's a dragon that they sold her to, and he was too old to eat the mate. But if it's not a dragon, it's not cute. It's horrifying.
I just wanted to make sure that we're clear that there is a whole section of middle grade that are books about death, like Bridge to Terabithia type things, and so you can absolutely kill a person. Right. If this is a book about grief and things, it's what we're talking about is more like the casual violence, the adventure violence.
If that is the topic.
Right.
But if you have a lot of other frivolous stuff and then suddenly somebody dies because of negligence, it's like, whoa, what? No.
Right.
But like, if the point is suicide, you can have a book about suicide.
Mm-hmm. But you can also have a conflict where a dragon versus a dragon.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Totally.
Those kind of things are
If they're animals, they get away with it.
Let's do right back here.
Yeah. So in writing in middle grade, do you ever find that sometimes because of the dynamics that are required by the industry that sort of it limits the amount of story possibilities? Like, take for instance something like It, right, by Stephen King. Obviously not a middle grade book, but the cast is, the junior high, basic elementary school kids, right, the junior high kids, right? And so do you ever feel like there's side of stories in middle grade that because of those standards where you're not able to tell certain stories with children in them because of that.
Do you ever feel like there are stories that you can't tell because of middle grade standards, or do you feel like you can tell any story, you just have to tweak how you tell it?
I think every genre and every audience has parameters, right? Like you can't tell a romance story that doesn't have a romance in it, right? And so I feel like it's true that there are things that are not middle grade, but that's true across the board. It's not unique to middle grade.
So what are the specific parameters that have middle grade?
So let me,
It has to be about a kid.
Yeah, let me. So I actually put a class together one time dividing YA from middle grade, not on age of protagonist, not on word count, and the two things that I came up with that were big ones were, one is motives and gray area in motives, okay? So if I wanted Ender's Game to be a middle grade novel, I'd have it be a kid who has to kill a bunch of aliens to save the world. As soon as he goes, but wait, if I destroy all the aliens, that makes me this terrible person and this terrible, that gray area doesn't happen in middle grade. Number two is the focus. In middle grade, it is on me, my friends, and my family. If there is a train going towards the city that's filled with explosives, and our hero has to choose whether they're going to save their friend who's tied to the tracks or save the city, they will always save their friend first. Now, they probably will save the city in some way too, but it's me, my friends, and my family as the sphere of influence. In YA, you can have your character have to make decisions that are better for society as a whole, but are devastating to their friends and their family. So those are two big things that I've noticed. Any other thoughts? Or?
And it also does depend on your publisher. There are going to be some publishers who are going to be okay with a little bit edgier stuff. And there are some publishers that are even looking at like page count. Like, we would love to do something like it, but it needs to be like 120 pages or less. Yeah. And that is a bigger criteria to them than children dying with clown death, you know? Like, so you're gonna want to talk to publishers about like your idea, like, is this a book for you? And a lot of times they'll even tell you, like, you know, this isn't a fit for us, but you know, my friend works over at Viking, and Viking will totally do that. Yeah. Because they all have their own thing. There's an imprint for YA called Speak, which is basically known as gritty contemporary teen stories. These are the teen pregnancy stories, the rape stories and stuff. They are Speak. One of my friends pitched a totally sweet, absolutely darling rom-com that just ended with the couple kissing for the first time to Speak, and the editor was just like, really? But she very politely sent her to the people that would publish that. Because, you know, she's like, this is a good book, it's good, this is not this. But it may be, too, that your story is an adult story like It, or what did we just say, or Ender's Game, but is actually for adults. It just happens to be with kids.
Right. Yep.
So.
Let's do one more question right here.
How do you guys personally balance the idea of being like a responsible writer because you're writing for kids without being like didactic or preachy?
Okay, so how do we as middle grade writers balance our responsibility to not tell kids to, you know, go kill each other or whatever the thing is, as opposed to being didactic or a preachy type story?
For me, I have characters who are honestly trying to be good people, and I let them figure it out. I put them in situations where they have to make a choice, and I let them figure out whether or not they're going to be the good person or the bad person, and I want them, and because they are trying to be good people, they will eventually figure it out.
I have more experience with this issue in YA, but I think probably the same principle applies in that for me, I try to apply consequences. Like if my character is going to do something that was a really bad idea, bad things should happen. I have a book about a character, this is not middle grade, this is a YA novel, about a character who decides that she's going to get pregnant. She's 16 years old so that her mom can have a baby because her mom is going through infertility. And this is a really terrible idea. And the rest of the book is about why this is a terrible idea. And like maybe it's not just a problem to have sex if you're worried about getting pregnant. Maybe it's still a problem when you're 16 and you want to get pregnant. And I feel like the same principle is true in middle grade. You're not dealing necessarily with that particular problem. But if your character does something that is really immoral, then you show the consequences. It's not didactic. You're not saying to the reader, here, you should never do this because, but they're having the opportunity to live it with the character and come to their own conclusion about how that was probably a really bad idea.
And I think that, again, that one of the big keys there is don't start with the moral that you want. Don't start with the lesson. Write the story that you write. And then if it's a good story, there are lessons, like I have to do it in the end of my books, they have these things where like discussion questions. And that's where you have to suddenly go back at your book and go, so Sarah and Charlie stole this. How would you feel if, you're not writing the story to have that conversation. You get done with it and then you go back and look at it. So we are out of time. All right, thanks everybody.